Hi guys, I hope you're doing well. And in this video, we'll be solving another past paper question that is November 2016, paper 23, question 3. It says identify two external costs of smoking. So external cost is basically the cost that is incurred by a third person for which he's not compensated for, right? So that's an external cost, also known as a negative externality. Although you're not supposed to define what external cost is in this question. So the person who's smoking, he's causing harm to his own health. That is the private cost of smoking, not the external cost of smoking. So the person who is not smoking and is sitting beside the person who's smoking, so he's a passive smoker. So obviously his health is at stake. So that is one example of external cost that you can give. That is the damage to the person who's not smoking but sitting beside the smoker. That is the passive smoker. You could give that it causes the smoking itself causes air pollution to the environment because of the smoke that comes out of the cigarette. So that is also another example of external cost. That is to the environmental damage that is being caused, the pollution to the environment, right? And obviously, smoking also results into people dying because the more people smoke, the more they aren't the only ones who are affected, but others around them are affected as well, and that causes an extensive pressure on the healthcare system, right? So there's an extensive burden on the healthcare system. We all know that we have less doctors here, we have less hospital beds per patient, right? So that is also an example of a negative externality, that there's excessive burden on the healthcare system, right? By the way, excessive burden on the healthcare system is an example of external cost that you can also give when you are writing that when you eat a lot of fast food, unhealthy, high cholesterol food, diabetic food. I mean, food that ultimately leads to diabetes, cholesterol, heart problems. So that also results into consuming such food not only causes harm to the person but to others as well, because that causes an additional, it causes a burden on the overall healthcare system in society. Okay, so part B says explain how perfectly inelastic demand differs from inelastic demand. So perfectly inelastic demand, you'll say is okay. So there's no need to define elasticity. Just start it directly. It's a 4-mark question. Perfectly inelastic demand is when PED is equals to 0, right? And that is it's perfectly inelastic. There's no elasticity in it, so there is no change in quantity demanded if price goes up and down. That is what you will write, right? So perfectly inelastic demand is when the change in price, it will have no effect on quantity demanded, right? And you'll just draw a diagram saying this is perfectly elastic demand. That is, demand curve is a vertical straight line, right? You label quantity demanded here, price on the y-axis, and that is what perfectly inelastic demand is. You can give the examples such as life-saving drugs is an example of perfectly inelastic demand. And inelastic demand is when PED is basically less than 1. And inelastic occurs when change in price causes a relatively less change in quantity demanded, right? And the demand curve for inelastic demand curve is a steep demand curve, right? It's steep. The slope of the demand curve is steep. And the reason why it is steep is that it represents that a small change or a change in price will ultimately result into an insignificant or relatively less change in quantity demanded, right? Now, so again, you see how quickly you have to attempt part A and part B. That's how quick you need to attempt part A and part B, not the irrelevant stuff, just the relevant stuff. Part C says analyze 2 ways apart from imposing an indirect tax in which a government could discourage smoking. So you could say that indirect tax is one of the solutions that can discourage smoking, because indirect tax increases the cost of production for firms, and firms then transfer the higher cost on the consumer in the form of high prices. And if the prices are high, that would discourage consumers from smoking. But then again, indirect taxes can be ineffective because in reducing the consumption of smoking, and this in terms of discouraging smoking, because as in the demand is inelastic for cigarettes, right? Since it's an addictive good. So other ways could be, that the government could come up with imposing a total ban, a complete ban on smoking, or imposing certain age limits, that, asking the sellers to not give cigarettes to people within a certain, not if they fall in a certain age limit. Coming up with strict laws as compared to, because you need to back up, as if you're imposing an age limit, you need to have strict laws for it. You need to come up with fines and penalties that should be strictly imposed by the government, by the state. and if they are not followed. So, the government should come up with strict laws and regulations that, govern who is going to buy the cigarette, at what age group, etc., etc. Not selling them to children or even teenagers. Right. The government could also, basically, what the government can do is, maybe if the cigarettes are imported, if these harmful smoking cigarettes are imported, the government could come up with a quota as well, right? A quota or a tariff that makes a tariff is basically a tax on imports. It makes your imports expensive. So, the cigarettes will get expensive, and that may discourage some of the consumers from consuming them. Quota is a ban, it's not a ban, is a limit on the quantity of how much will you import. So, if the state is importing maybe 100,000 boxes, a week, maybe the quota would limit it to maybe only 10,000 boxes a week, right? So these are the ways in which the government can actually, reduce, apart from just imposing indirect taxes, the government could discourage smoking. Other than that, the government, because these are all, so the government could also come up with, imparting more knowledge, such as providing more information regarding how harmful cigarettes could be. Maybe starting a health campaign could be one of the ways in which the government could, inform people of how harmful smoking is. Such as, we know that during the times of COVID, the government was taking significant measures in imparting knowledge of how bad the COVID is, and how they should be careful while going out and talking to people, how they should wear masks and all. So they were doing an effort, and the government can spend a significant amount of money on advertising and providing information and doing these healthcare campaigns. So this is another way in which, the government could come up with ways in which they could reduce the demand for smoking. So basically, this provision of information and coming up with health campaigns will actually reduce demand for cigarettes. So remember that if the government basically imposes an indirect tax on the cigarette producing companies, that will actually reduce supply of the cigarettes, right? And when it reduces supply, so less cigarettes will be available. And also, if the supply goes down, we know that if supply goes down, it increases the price of the cigarettes as well, right? So supply basically may go down, and that would also not only reduce the amount of cigarettes being sold in the market, but also increase the price as well. So that is a supply side, thing. But I think a more sustainable and a long-term measure could be reducing demand for it. So if there's less demand, then people, no matter how cheaper the cigarettes are, if there's less demand, then less people will buy them, right? So that is more sustainable in a long-term measure of actually reducing. In fact, at times a past paper question comes that, discuss question comes that how effective indirect taxes are in reducing the cigarette consumption or goods that are harmful, or maybe reducing the provision of demerit goods. So in that case, remember, if it's a discuss question, you can mention the fact that there are other measures as well to reduce the consumption and provision of demerit goods or harmful goods. And one of the ways could be to target demand, right? To target the demand for demerit goods, to target the demand for these addictive goods. And that is usually done through provision of information. But then again, that also requires a significant amount of cost being involved. And you know that this cost has an opportunity cost as well, because this money could have been spent elsewhere on maybe infrastructure, on, etc. So you could mention these points. So this would be part of your part C, analyze two ways, apart from imposing an indirect tax in which a government could discourage smoking. So you could, then keep on elaborating on it. How can the government come up with health campaigns and etc. And how would that reduce? So basically, if demand for cigarettes would go down, so would the consumption of cigarettes go down, right? Again, bans could be imposed, fines could be imposed, maybe just banning certain public areas in which there is a lot of, maybe banning public smoking in certain concerts or restaurants, or maybe near schools, right? So this is kind of an open-ended question. You could come up with your own ideas and somehow mix it with the economic knowledge you have, and then, form a good answer. Another thing that the government could do is, so maybe there are some alternatives to cigarettes as well, such as nicotine patches, such as, so nicotine patches are often prescribed by doctors as well for those people who are severely addictive to smoking. So if the cost of nicotine patches is very high, maybe the government could subsidize nicotine patches, right? The government could actually subsidize nicotine patches to producers. The government would give subsidies to the producers of nicotine patches, and that would actually reduce their cost of production, and that would also bring the price down. So a lot of people these days, maybe the poor people who are addicted to smoking might complain that nicotine patches are expensive. But if the government subsidizes producers who produce these nicotine patches, then maybe the price would go down, and that would result into a common man to buy these nicotine patches, and then that would help him taper off his addiction for cigarettes, right? So the government would give subsidies to, you could say the government would give subsidies to firms that produce and sell less harmful products that act as maybe substitutes, that act as substitutes for cigarettes. Or maybe there are certain medicines as well, by the way, that can actually, reduce your addiction. But if those medicines are very expensive, then the government would give subsidies to those, medicine producing companies, right? That will lower their cost and hence subsequently lower the price as well. So it's a good question. You can mention a lot of points here, and it's an easy scoring question. So let's now look at part D of the question. It says, discuss whether a merger between two large companies in the same industry will increase the price of the product. So for example, let's take an example of Nixer plus Cedar College. And let's say that they both are in the education industry and they both merge together. And when two firms merge together, it's basically an integration, right? So two firms merging together is an integration, and they both integrate. It seems like a horizontal integration to me right now. And if they merge, so the question is asking if there are already two large firms. If they merge, so the question is saying, and if they both belong to the same industry, so maybe Coke and Pepsi merge, let's say, this will that increase the price of the product? So basically it's saying that there are two large companies, company A and company B, they merge together, and when they merge together, they form one company. So basically, if they merge together, they are not competitors anymore, right? So they eliminate the competition aspect amongst themselves. So the question is asking, discuss whether a merger between two large firms will increase the price of the product or not. So obviously, first we'll define what a merger is. It's when two firms, right, they become one firm instead of being two different competitors for each other. They become one firm, and then the competition aspect between themselves ends, and then together, they become one organization together, and they basically try to run the operations in an attempt to maximize combined profits for themselves, right? In an attempt to maximize the combined profits from amongst themselves. So the question is asking you, will it increase the price of the product? So you could say that, a merger between two large firms could have both aspects to it. It could increase the price of the product as well. It could not increase the price of the product as well. So basically what they're saying is that, let's say Nixer College plus Cedar College, they merged together. So maybe Nixer was charging maybe $50 a month, and let's say Cedar was charging maybe $45 a month. And if they merge together, how much will they charge to students? Will they charge maybe $80 together a month, or maybe they'll charge $30 together a month? So whatever it is, it's basically asking you, try to understand the question. The question is not asking you what are the advantages. Also, let me tell you, by the way, that when I've checked this answer for the students, a lot of students have actually misunderstood the question, and they have actually come up with advantages and disadvantages of integration. That is, how beneficial the merger will be for the two firms, or how disadvantages will the merger be for the two firms. But that's not the question that is asking you. So that is why I gave you the example of Nixer and Cedar. It's basically asking you if they merge together. So now the competition has ended, right? So let's suppose if Cedar was giving a huge discount, maybe Nixer would have given a huge discount as well, because initially they were competitors. Or maybe if Nixer was giving a huge discount, then Cedar would have followed and given a much bigger discount. than Nixer. But now, since they both have merged together and they both act as one firm, right? They both are not competitors of each other anymore. So maybe they could combine, agree that now we are going to charge a high price instead. Instead of charging low price, now we're going to charge high price. And since merger eliminates competition, so the customer has no option now, right? The customer has no option because both large firms who are market leaders in the education industry are actually charging a combined high price now because they both are one firm. They both are not competitors anymore, right? Remember? So in the past, we have seen a lot of companies merging together, like Jazz and Warid had a merger in Pakistan. It's a telecommunication network, and they both merged and they became one organization. So that may result into the price of the product to decrease, and they may also result into price of the product to increase as well. So let's see why or how could sort of the price of the product. First, let's see that how will it increase? Why will the price of the product increase? So basically, first of all, remember that merger reduces competition. So if competition goes down, now Nixer and Cedar, they both become one firm. So now they have a chance. Now they have a chance to actually increase the price of the product. Before they couldn't increase the price of the product because of competition, right? So Nixer had the competition from Cedar had the competition from Nixer, and now both of them can actually, now they both are one organization and they don't have that competition element in them. So yeah, they can increase the price now. So it reduces competition. And remember, whenever competition goes down, there's more market dominance now. So the organization is now dominating a higher market share. So there's more dominance, right? There's more domination of the market right now. Or also that the firm may end up becoming a monopoly as well. So if Nixer and Cedar merge together, two large organizations, and by the way, the question is giving you a hint as well. It says they both are two large firms, right? So if they merge together, obviously there is a chance of becoming a monopoly. Maybe let's say if City School and Beacon House merge together, they are two large organizations, right? So obviously that would sort of, give a monopoly element to it, and they would end up acting as monopolies. And then, we know that monopolies are basically price makers. Instead of price takers, they are price makers. They set their own prices. They don't charge the market price. In fact, they set their own price, right? And then the firm will have the ability to actually raise the price now. And yes, as far as the statement is concerned, that does a merger in this, in the same industry will increase the price of the product. This holds true because now the competition element has gone and now they're dominating the market and may also become a monopoly. Now they have the ability to raise the price because now consumers so the consumer can't say to Cedar that, oh, fine, you're not reducing the price, I'll go to Nixer. Because Nixer is also Cedar is also Nixer now, right? So basically the consumer reduces alternate. So that is the problem, right? The consumer loses the alternative options now. And the firm starts dominating the market. So yes, it will then have the capability and the potential to increase the price, and before it couldn't. So you have to properly explain this thing, right, in the exam. Also, that is one aspect to it. This is one of the reasons due to which you could say, your price in the market would actually go up. Another reason could be that. So another reason could also be that so you could also argue in the exam. So guys, another reason could also be that, for example, when firms merge together, they actually become large, right? And large, if firms become large, and the problem is that if the firms become too large, now this is the problem. Becoming large is not a problem, but becoming too large and too quick is a problem. So if firms become too large and that happens too quickly, right, without proper planning and without proper resources, and so that will result into diseconomies of scale. That results into diseconomies of scale. Now remember that diseconomies of scale always arises when firms become too large and too quick. Now this is the reason why diseconomies occur. And if firms become too large, which means they become excessively large, and that happens excessively quickly, then diseconomies of scale would happen, right? And remember that diseconomies of scale is a disadvantage of growth, right? It's a disadvantage. So is growth helpful? Yes, it is beneficial, but then again, diseconomies of scale is a disadvantage for large firms, because a lot of firms have become too large that they may exceed the optimum size, right? So there has to be an optimum size for the growth for the growth to take place as well. So if they exceed their optimum size, that would actually result into diseconomies of scale. And the problem with diseconomies of scale is that diseconomies of scale results into average cost to go up, right? It results into average cost of the product, that is cost per unit, to go up. And that is actually passed on to the consumer. It is actually, you're right, that it's actually passed on to the consumer, basically in the form of a higher price, right? Maybe you could give a few examples of diseconomies, like managerial diseconomies of scale, technical labor diseconomies of scale, right? So maybe the labor is not able to, hang along with the labor of the other organization, or maybe the management is totally screwed, right? So, and yes, there are a lot of coordination problems, administrative problems, managerial problems, because if two large organizations merge, they may become excessively large, resulting into a lot of coordination issues between the departments as well. And that would result into loss of customers, because loss of sales, loss of revenues, and that would also result into higher average cost of production. So, and that would definitely result into a higher price, which will be passed on to the consumer. But again, that's not a good thing. Also remember that. Also remember that. So you could also argue that there are these two large firms. Let's say we're talking about in the education industry, Nixer and Cedar. They are two market leaders, and let's say that they merge together, and they come up with so before Nixer and Cedar were competitors, but after merging, the quality of the education actually goes up, right? Because they both come up. So since these are two large organizations merging together, so obviously the outcome of one of the possible outcomes that would be that they would come up with an education system that is much better, more technical, maybe maybe hiring teachers from abroad, using the latest technology, spending a lot of money in research and development, using new technology, and that actually would result into the quality of the product to go up. And remember that whenever the quality of the product goes up, what happens is that the demand of the product goes up. So the demand for their products will go up. So now more people will be willing to go to, so those people who are willing to go to other colleges like maybe City School or maybe Beacon House would now be preferring to go to Nixer and Cedar, because now they have actually witnessed that since these both colleges have merged, the quality of education provided by them have. So if Nixer merges with Cedar, so it means that Nixer will be sharing Cedar's teachers, and the Cedar's teachers, so the best faculty of Cedar will be shared by Nixer, and Nixer's best faculty will be shared by Cedar. So obviously the quality of education that was now provided by this one organization, before there were two, will actually go up. And obviously if that happens, the demand for the product will go up. And remember, whenever the demand for the product goes up, we know that whenever the demand goes up, what happens? We know that if the demand goes up, the market price rise, right? So if the demand goes up, ultimately the impact would be that the price of the product would go up. So the statement that says that the statement that says that if these two firms merge together, so will the price of the product go up or not? So yes, it's true. So you could give these three examples or three reasons why the price of the product would go up, and you could score the best of the best marks, right? Moving forward, however, the fact that it's not always true, because so then you will say, however, then you write, however, it could also be argued that this statement is not always true. It's not necessary that if the firms merge together in the same industry, the price of the product will go up, because remember, one of the advantages of growth, or one of the advantages of being a large firm, is that it results into economies of scale. And economies of scale means that your average cost goes down, right? When average cost goes down, this cost advantage is basically passed on to the consumer in the form of lower prices. Remember that always, that whenever economies of scale happens, average cost goes down, that is actually passed on to the consumer in the form of lower prices. And a lot of people think that if prices goes down, so profits would go down as well. That's not true, because your overall cost is going down. Since your cost of production is going down, so if the prices are going down, based on your costs going down, that does not impact your profits, because in either case, your profits are not impacted because your cost is going down as well, right? In fact, in most instances, your profits actually go up, right? If your cost is decreasing by a greater percentage than the fall in price, right? So you could give examples of technical economies of scale, maybe. So like I said, if Nixer uses the best teachers of Cedar, Cedar uses the best teachers of Nixer, and they both share the faculty. So obviously, Nixer would have spent significant amount of training its teachers. Cedar would have spent significant amount of training its teachers. And now now Nixer is actually sharing Cedar's faculty, in fact, the best faculty, without having the need to train them, right? So again, that's basically, they are benefiting from economies of scale now, right? Also, we know, also large organizations, they can also benefit from financial economies of scale, by the way. Financial economies of scale in which they could obtain a huge amount of loans from banks at low interest rates, and people are willing to fund them. People are willing to give them money to actually run the business and run the show and grow further. So all of this would actually reduce the average cost of the organization, and would help and that would reduce the cost, and that would be transferred in the form of lower prices for the consumers, right? Also remember that not all firms are actually profit maximizers, or all firms are seeking to maximize profits, right? So although, yes, if there are two large organizations, then they merge together, but then it also depends upon the objective of the firm as well. You will say that it depends upon the objective of the firm. Maybe the firm is trying to maximize sales instead of profits. Maybe the current objective. So for example, right now, the current objective of Bright is to maximize market share and to maximize sales revenue instead of maximizing profits. And that is why we're offering the course at such a minimal price, right? Because profit maximization is not the objective at the moment, right? Sales maximization is the objective. So we are playing on the quantity instead of the price. So maximization of sales revenue is another objective that owners may have. They may be trying to maximize the market share. And how do you, by the way, maximize market share? You maximize market share through maximizing your sales revenues. And that is done by keeping the prices as low as possible, especially from other competitors. So it's not necessary that the price of the product will always go up. Also remember that even if let's suppose, even if Mixer and Cedar, they think of actually increasing the price by more than what Beacon House and City School is charging, if they together think of increasing the price, maybe the government of the country of the state of the government of Pakistan may have imposed a law which is preventing them from actually increasing the price. Maybe the government of Pakistan says that the annual or the monthly fee that is charged by colleges will not be more than maybe $30. So what I'm trying, so it's a hypothetical example that I'm giving, that the government, basically you'll say that the government may intervene as well, right? Especially if it's an essential commodity. So if it's an essential good, maybe if it's an essential good that is consumed by an average consumer, that is by the rich as well, and also by the poor as well. Usually in such circumstances, the government may intervene and may prevent prices to rise. So government intervention is also a possibility that may exist. So even if these firms think of increasing the prices, maybe the government does not let them to do, right? Maybe the government might set up a maximum price. Remember, price controls, the government might actually set up a maximum price on the product that limits basically the firms to actually increase prices. Remember, we talked about maximum prices, what they are. We talked about price controls, and we said that the government will intervene and will put a maximum price, and the price can actually not exceed beyond P max, right? So this is why, these are one of the reasons why mergers will not end up increasing the price of the product. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed and understood the video and you liked it as well. So I'll see you all in the next video. Until then, take care.